let's just do this. It's not gonna be a like we already started recording and everything. It's not gonna be a regular episode in the sense that it's kind of okay. It's both an episode that I've been meaning to do for a long time, and at the same time, it's an episode that whenever we decide to do it, we probably would have something both the same and also different to say, if that makes sense. So for listeners who are already confused, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the title of this episode and the description by now. This is the Fire These Times. I'm Elia and I'm joined by Ayman. We're talking about Gaza and we're talking about the genocide in Gaza, and we're talking in especially like as the massacre of last night. We're recording this on Monday, May 27th, 2024, for the record. We've been planning to record this, as I said, for quite some time, so it just happened to be recorded the day after yesterday, which I guess made it even more urgent in my head to just do this. And it started off as a kind of a meta episode in the sense that I wanted to talk about why I want to talk about this, because in terms of like talking about what's happening in Gaza, I'm assuming most listeners know at least the gist of things. This isn't a news podcast, as everyone knows, but we are going to talk about it. We're just going to talk about it. So yeah, I don't think that we should even, I don't know if we should bother with the intros. Folks know what they know by now. Ayman is a co-host of the Fire These Times, is also the host of Politically Depressed and Keep This Between Us, which you can find on wherever podcasts are casted, well, Politically Depressed. And Keep This Between Us is available on patreon.com/Fire These Times. Yeah, I don't know how to start this, so I think we'll just... Last night was a horror show. There's no other way of describing it. I've mentioned this a few times, not even actively checking the news and social media compared to my past habits, at least mostly for mental health reasons and because I have a young baby and I need to prioritize her. But the footage of last night did pop up. It was pretty, I think, almost inevitable given the algorithm of the folks I follow and all of that stuff. And the gory details are what they are. People can, as I said, look for them if they look them up if they want to. I don't like describing them. I don't feel like it does anything. It's just horrible. What marked me are the sounds. As someone who usually scrolls through social media with no sound on purpose, this time it was on. I don't know why. I felt like I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear what's happening. I mean, I knew. I mean, it's some of those things. It's not fucking rocket science. You know the past 7 months, you know Israel, you know the bombing of Gaza, which is not even the first one. I know this one is by far the worst. And in my case, I'm familiar with Syria, bombings and the aftermath. People react the way they do because everyone's human. In this case, they speak the same language as well. So like lots of flashbacks. Let's put it that way.
I've heard a lot of times yesterday, I heard a lot of people comparing the experience of just witnessing last night and the siege of Aleppo in 2016.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that we knew was going to happen. This is the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
We've known from the very beginning of many of us that when the Israelis were saying go south, go here, go there, that it's all pretense.
Yeah.
And those of us saying it is a genocide, it's the scary thing wherein we want to be proven wrong, but we're screaming from the top of our lungs. And just seeing it unfold is still horrible. Like, this is the Rafah assault that we knew was going to happen. And yeah, gory details, it's difficult because it's like you need to bear witness. But at the same time, I honestly feel... I couldn't really sleep last night, and I feel incredibly fucked. And I don't know, I have friends asking like, how are you coping? How are we coping?
I'm not coping.
I'm not. I'm broken. I found myself at the store just so tense and just letting out these noises and just generally like going insane. It just is just, I don't know.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna bring up Aleppo because last night was this is like a personal anecdote, but it's just so relevant to what we're going to be talking about. Like in end of 2016, my now wife, at the time girlfriend, and we were living together, and so the fall of Aleppo, we kind of witnessed it live, whatever, however you want to put it, because we both were, and now slightly less so because things have just gotten so much worse since then. Been highly involved in like Syrian activism, Syria-related activism. And that moment of, in my specific case, like I must have had a look in my eyes while scrolling through my phone, and she noticed, and she asked like, what's going on? And I think the words I must have said like 5 syllables, like I must have said like, I don't know, they're bombing Rafah, they're bombing Gaza again, or something. And it's pretty bad. Something along those lines, something pretty vague, but like also pretty obvious, at least for us. She was working on something, and she put everything else aside, and like she came to like hug me because it was pretty obvious where this was leading in my head. Okay, let me put it this way. We've seen the ICJ saying stuff. We've seen the ICC saying stuff. We even seen like the German government being relatively, and here I emphasize on relatively because they've been a shit show from the beginning, slightly more human. And Macron, is more direct. Oh, those terms, because politicians are so careful about the words they use. And I can't, part of me keeps on asking, like, is anything gonna stop this? Anything? Like, are the fucking Egyptians gonna, like, anyone, at this point, like, anything? And yet it feels, I mean, it's not fear. I think we can say this for a fact that like it's actually the fact that the ICC put out a warrant against Netanyahu, that the ICJ ordered them to stop, blah, 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 that they seem to actually want to double down as like to prove that they can. Like it is a matter of showing that you can do this thing that you've been doing for the past 7 months, and that you can continue doing it despite, because the whole Netanyahu's thing is that, he's defying the world or whatever. And that's something that for me, I struggle with a lot. I've said this a number of times, like it's not that the suffering doesn't affect me anymore, it does, but it affects me in a very specific way. I have this weird compartmentalization where like it's gonna hit me in like 6 months kind of thing. Yeah. That comes from Syria related stuff. It's just like, it's gonna hit me. I know it's gonna hit me soon. I know, like, but just not now. In the moment, just not now. Although with the assault of Rafah yesterday it did, and then I kind of compartmentalized it once again. But what kind of breaks me, and I still struggle with it, is the banality of the people on the other side. The fact that I don't believe in evil. Like, for me that's utterly pointless stuff. But they're doing evil. They're doing their evil deeds while just being boring, mediocre individuals dancing in a party. That disgusting people I've seen in best now, like chanting, it's a Kahanist slogan of like, may your village burn or something in Hebrew, to like techno music, and all those videos on TikTok of people mocking dead babies and shit like that, and the Telegram channels that we've seen, all of that. That's what terrifies me. It really genuinely scares me. Because they are selfishly, even like they are fucking neighbors. Like that scares me. Like it just genuinely scares me, even beyond my immediate fear for Gaza. Anyway, take it away. I'm rambling a bit.
Yeah. No, the problem is there just is no language to describe what's happening. I hear people call them evil, call them psychopaths, call them fascists. Like there's one thing that I know, like I don't do this comparison that much, and I know you don't. When people talk about this is a Holocaust or that the like Zio-Nazis, to me it's less, there are sort of literal parallels, and even from 1948.
Yeah.
But it is more also for me a kind of rhetorical, this is the worst thing that can happen, and it is happening. And it's just in that way that, Einstein is so immediately correlated, when you think of intelligence, the Holocaust is the thing that everyone can agree is just the worst thing, you know what I mean? Something so incredibly horrible. Yeah, we're really hitting those limits of like what needs to happen, what needs to whatever, to be shown, to be said, even using the most hyperbolic language. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying like talking about genocide, not just as in literally it is what it is, but also
it's the worst word you can say out loud. Like I don't think, at least in the English language, as far as I can tell, I don't think there's like Masha Gessen is like, they're Jewish and they compared Gaza to a ghetto. A number of Holocaust survivors have compared this to a ghetto and have called this genocide. And it's like, if they are saying that from their own personal experience, what else is needed, right? The whole post-war status quo, at least in the West and whatnot, the whole thing, like never again. Like if the people who experience it are saying we are breaking that promise, supposedly that we we, quote unquote, whoever the we is here, if they are saying it, who else, who else has then the right to narrate? We are deprived of that right as Arabs, especially as Palestinians, of course. If Holocaust survivors don't even have the right to narrate the legacy of the Holocaust, who the fuck does?
Yeah.
At what point does it get so bad that people burnt alive? And of course, I said I wasn't going to go with the details, but whatever. Like the headless baby corpse and the screams and all of that in my head that are probably going to be in my brain forever.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
What's going to stop them? And the thing is this is why I think a lot of us have been in such a weird situation, and why it's been very difficult to do any analysis. I personally have been doing very little analysis the last 8 months. I've been sharing, analysis from, let's say, about Europe and European complicity and the kind of ideology, but there's really not any room for analysis when it's just all of this is a language of war, is a language of just, I don't know how to describe it. And so it is, Zionism has always been an incredibly, incredibly violent movement and structure. And as we're seeing now in its moment of collapse, it is becoming even more and intensely violent. And part of the problem with such violent entities and structures is that it demands of its victims, this is the language that we talk. And so if you want to and so this is why there is a thing called armed struggle, and there has been since the late 60s. And it's just, when we're talking about armed struggle against Israel, it's become incredibly clear that it's not just supported by, but it is this with the US military, it is and the US empire. Joe Biden is not just, oh, he's doesn't know what he's doing and he's kind of fumbling into this. He is a hardcore Zionist. This is his genocide too. And so it really hits this final boss impossibility of how do you confront the US war machine in its totality? And yeah. And so it's it feels very futile. All I can do these days is to share, is to fundraise, is to try to do some sort of propaganda here and there. But it's so much of it feels useless because the space for the intellectual battle or the cultural battle or the kind of political discussions for me feels so limited. And I've really been struggling with this as someone who is a writer, who's a podcaster, who's an intellectual, who my whole thing is about, not doing the debate, but doing the argument or doing the,
It's that I've mentioned this a few times. The whole the knock from below joke, which supposedly is a Soviet one. We thought we hit rock bottom, then we heard the knock from below. I by now I think it's my default framework. It's not that I always expect things to get worse. I'm not a cynical person. I try not to be, genuinely. I do take to heart, James Baldwin, he said, I'm forced to be an optimist. Because to be a pessimist is to believe that life is an academic matter, is how he put it. In the sense that you're not in it. It's something just to study, theoretically. I believe that. I believe that I am one, but I also know that I fail at it, right? That's why it's a discipline. Hope is a discipline, all of that stuff. And it's one that is normal to fail at, almost by design, I guess, given the world we live in, all the time. The point is just to not completely give up, even temporarily give up. I get it. We had a conversation with Aiden and Margaret Killjoy, some weeks ago, and at some point we mentioned despair. Is despair even allowed? And of course it is, because who's gonna prevent us? But it's natural, it's normal. And my fear right now, other than seeing what again Baldwin would call them moral monsters, when he was talking about white Americans, honestly applicable to this day, but especially at the time, it was obviously worse. He said he's genuinely scared and he's worried by the death of the heart and the kind of the hatred of the unthinking hordes, that they genuinely, those people, I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost, I think, word for word, those people have really convinced themselves that I am not human. They really genuinely convinced themselves. Once you accept that, in the sense of you know that this is what's happening, that they're not they're not seeing Palestinians in Gaza as human. They generally are not. It's not even like they're debating it behind. No, they don't see that. They don't believe that. Then the rest starts making, well, of course, then that's what's gonna do. If they generally believe this, and we know by like we may have Maya Wind on the podcast soon, and she went through like the Israeli textbooks and Israeli academia and how it's also complicit in the production of knowledge that is inherently genocidal, that is about erasing the native. If that's how it starts, then like what's the natural conclusion of that? There are two conclusions as far as we can know historically. One is the kill the Indian, save the man, white settler colonial in the Americas, or so-called Americas, against what we call indigenous peoples, which was started off as like murder, and then at some point it was converted into, well, we can keep their bodies, but their minds are the ones that we need to fix, quote unquote, and change and convert to Christianity or whatever. And then you have the Israeli version, because the Israelis are not interested in kill the Indian, save the man. They just want to kill both. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in having subjugated like Israeli subjects. They don't want that. They see Palestinians as a demographic threat, and they've talked about using those terms for decades.
No, and so this is why I the comparisons between Palestine and South Africa for me are always limited by that very fact.
Yeah.
There was at no point that they wanted to literally exterminate all of them.
They couldn't.
In the way that they couldn't, but also it just wasn't part of the project. But also, one thing that really upsets me, I mean, everything that's happening is upsetting, and it's just, I'm fidgeting, like I'm so uneasy in my body constantly. And it's that there's so little space to grieve, because yesterday was the Rafah massacre, and it's just going to continue today.
Yeah.
And tomorrow and after tomorrow. And there's mass starvation, and there's structural violence, and there's the complete destruction of the healthcare system and waters, and people don't have food. And so it's just like there's so much suffering. And we are forced constantly into this. I mean, and this is so much in our region in general. There's no to like kind of analyze or to kind of be like, how are we coping? Teach me, you know. Or then what's the silver lining? Like, what can we say of this? And so like something that's been happening a lot over the last few months is that like, yeah, this is horrible, but you know, the road is long, but we're on the right path. And it's like so difficult to say that while there's the bodies burning. I think Muhammad al-Kurd wrote a poem, or I think this might even be Mahmoud Darwish. I think is Darwish, yeah. I think Lina Munzir in an interview told me this about like, how can you write poetry next to a burning body? And writing poetry obviously is that act of hope, and is that act of like processing.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult. I don't know. The Arabic word that I've been using a lot to describe how I'm feeling is midaya. And for me, it doesn't really have a corollary in English. I'm uneasy. I'm uncomfortable in my body. I'm just not easy. I'm not. And that's been a lot of the last few months. But I think something big happened yesterday that kind of awoke a lot of us who had kind of, even the ones who were pushing themselves as hard to like stay bear witnessing and to do whatever we can. It was a bit of a wake-up call that we're not doing enough, that we've all kind of gotten a bit numb, that the suffering is still happening, and it can get worse. This is the fucked up thing, is that after the Al-Ahli hospital massacre, after the Al-Shifa hospital massacre, after the Flower massacre, after this use of starvation as a weapon of war, the TikToks of the soldiers wearing the women's clothes who they've killed or displaced, playing with the kids' toys, of just, it really is pushing the kind of understandings of life, of humanity, like not humanity in a kind of global project, just, and again, pushing the very limits of what holds the world together. Because if the fucking International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and the Security Council, you know, they did pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire, and just nothing happened. And not just nothing happened, they've doubled down.
Yeah.
And it's like, so what is this? Like, what are we doing? What is holding things together? And I don't know, it's a globalization of something that we as Arabs have known for a very long time, which is that the powerful are just heartless and they've got the guns.
Yeah.
Fuck, I'm so tense.
Yeah, I mean, how? Yeah. I'm thinking when you mentioned the ICJ, I was thinking of the chief prosecutor. I forgot his first name. Khan is the last name. Mentioning like a senior official who, in my mind, is like 99% likely to be an American one, because it just sounds like something an American would say. Probably a Republican, but honestly, at this point, who the fuck knows? Saying that like the ICC is ICC, sorry, yeah, ICC, not ICJ. The ICC is for Africa and for thugs like Putin. He said this on record, like this. Someone told him that, and indeed, for those who don't know, like something like, I don't have the exact numbers with me, but let's say it's something along the lines of like the ICC has issued 50 arrest warrants, something like this, and 47 of those have been against Africans, dictators. And war criminals and whatnot. And it's not to say that those 47 whatever did not deserve it, but there's something weird about that number. Putin being the more recent non-African. And if things go well, Netanyahu will be added to that list. But that kind of mask off moment in many ways. I mean, it wasn't fully mask off because the person who said this did not say it himself, but said it to the chief prosecutor who then relayed it. Is what many people sort of already know, right? But there's something weird that happens, and I think it's a politics of language. I don't know what the fuck it is, but even when everyone knows something is hypocritical or whatnot, the fact that everyone, quote unquote, is kind of going along with it is part of that creative process. It's part of making it truer than it could be otherwise. And there's something that happens when, for example, we know this with like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the ICC warrant were issued against Putin and whatever her name is, the one who kidnapped kids, Ukrainian kids. There's something that happened when then the Russians stop pretending to give a shit about international law, right? Like we know they never did, but they played the game because they cared about the diplomatic pros and cons of doing this, and that's kind of the language that's used at the UN. Even if you're like North Korea sits in those assembly general and says, yes, we vote to recognize, or no, we vote to not, even though like why they obviously don't give a shit, but that's part of the process of kind of reproducing that legitimacy. And there's something that happens as a state, and there's something that happens when that state, in the case of Russia is the obvious one, and now Israel more and more and more, stops pretending. Because this is what scares me. What scares me is that about an hour ago, Netanyahu issued a statement saying that like it was a mistake and there's going to be an investigation, blah, 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 blah. Now that tells me, not that he gives a shit, we know he does not. But it tells me that like he felt some kind of pressure from within, Americans, EU, whatever, to just say something. Hey, we know you won't do anything. We know that's not going to happen. We know investigation is just a way of just not doing anything. But just say something, because we need it for our media. We need it for the prompts. We need it for the BBC. Literally did that today. Said like, the IDF said there was a violent incident in Gaza and that they are investigating it. That's literally the framework that they used. And in order for that framework to kind of reproduce itself, in order to be viable the next day, they need those official statements. So my best guess, someone told him to do this, whatever, and so he did. I'm genuinely wondering, like, if this is with that kind of quote-unquote restraint, like actually bothering, spending 5 seconds out of your time after the fact to make that statement. What happens when you don't want to make that statement? When you feel like there's no point even making that? Because with that, we're seeing what's happening now. And in my mind, it's like, I'm trying to tell myself, stop telling yourself it can't get worse, because you're wrong. I'm telling myself that all the time. And I know I'm wrong because Syria, and I know I'm wrong just because history with a capital H and whatnot. And okay, this is the scariest thing about what's happening and the comparison to the Holocaust. There is one thing about World War II, which is that as the Germans were losing the war, and they knew that they were losing the war, they stepped up the extermination of the Jews and Poles and Roma, Sinti and other folks, and the disabled and so on. They actually diverted resources from the front. They diverted resources away from it in order to accelerate the genocide. And my concern, my worry is that we're kind of seeing something like this happening, or we may see something like this happening. That's what scares me, genuinely scares me.
Yeah.
Because like at some point there is a kind of a sunken cost, a zero-sum game. I mean, that's what I was looking at, a zero-sum game. Like, we've already been doing this for 8 months. Are we going to stop now? That kind of logic. We're not going to stop now. We're going to continue until the end. That's the Serbian logic in Sarajevo. The siege for like 1,000 plus whatever days. At some point it's like, well, we've been doing this for 300, 400 days. We cannot stop now. And the only thing that stopped it in that case was outside forces, of course. Which then brings out the question is like, is there going to be any outside? But whatever, yeah.
Well, so exactly. And then that we start getting into the conversation of intent.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a massive thing when talking about genocide.
Yeah.
It's not like, it has been the most brazen lie since the beginning about Hamas, about the hostages, about whatever. They don't give a shit.
Yeah.
And when they attack a tent and they say it's a targeted strike against Hamas, I think there's something like, it's not, and I mean, this is the whole concept of collateral damage, especially in the context of a genocide. There is no collateral damage. There is no safe zone. The point is they want to kill all of them. They want to push them into the desert. They want to create a greater Israel. And this connects with what they're doing in the West Bank as well. I think for Netanyahu, the mask off moment, I mean, I hate the fact that we're still talking about Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, he's been around my whole life, you know? Is when they killed those World Kitchen aid workers.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of like when he went up and he felt the need to give his apology, he was like smirking.
Yeah.
It was like just very obvious. And again, I don't believe anything they say. It's like when it's any of the apologies, any of the whatever, even the feeling that, oh, I did wrong to my ally and I need to show, like, there's like I don't know. And again, there's just no language to describe Benjamin Netanyahu. Like, evil did not begin because he is I don't know. Because the intent there, it was a targeted strike.
Yeah.
And it just feels like there's some of these bits that like gets lost in just trying to convince the entire Western media, the entire industry, the so many people, where it's like, just convince them of the reality. It's like they don't know that social media exists and that we're seeing all this. It's like a massive gaslight. But
I've always wondered, I mean, I do think it's there has to be part of the power play being that, like, we know you're seeing this with your own eyes. We are still going to deny it, and we're going to create new facts on the ground so that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is like Assad level propaganda where it's just like pure unadulterated lies.
Yeah. And repeated time and time again while it's happening, while we can see it's happening. It could be literally be happening. Like, he could be, I mean, this happened. Bashar Assad happened literally. There was images, photos that he was shown by one of the journalists in 2015 or 2016. It was, I think, the Caesar files, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, like, oh, those are Photoshop. Those are, you know, whatnot. He sees them with his own eye. He obviously doesn't give a shit. But the point is that then it's like, it's the whole like alternative facts, right? It disarms the journalist who is not ready and not equipped, to be honest. I think we need to really talk about journalists not being good at journalism these days. Not equipped to deal with a situation where the person that they are interviewing is not bound by, and it doesn't feel that they're bound. Should be, sure, but doesn't feel that they're bound to reality, to facts, because they've understood that the fact is the power, is might. That they, as long as they know that they can do the thing that they want to do, that their aim is what it is, and we know what it's been from the beginning. Even the fucking Egyptians have known what it's been. That's why they obviously closed the border. Given that we know this, and they know that we know this, there is a power play there. There's a power dynamic that happens. The fact that they can do it anyway. You know, it's the fact that it's not just that, like, they need to then create, you know, we remember the ICJ that they were supposed to come back after a month and present evidence to the International Court of Justice, the UN's top legal court. The closest thing we have, at least in this idealistic sense, to kind of world accountability, although in practice, that's obviously not the case most of the time. They had to come back after a month after the initial ruling that they need to prevent acts of genocide, whatever the legal term, the legal framing was. They had to come back after a month with a report proving that they have been doing that. We know personally for a fact that in the month that followed, they just continued doing the thing. And so in my head, I was like, what's in that fucking report? You know, like what's actually written? They had to probably written hundreds of pages. What is in that content?
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't matter.
Just, yeah.
It's. I mean, I've seen extracts of it. It's basically Hamas terrorism, the human shields, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't want to spend too much time trying to expending too much time playing their game. Essentially, the point is that yeah.
I mean, just to sort of one major example of all of this is like I still don't understand why Bashar al-Assad holds elections. Like, who is that for?
But that's for me. No, I do. So the reason I know this is just because the literature on authoritarianism, that's all. Putin does the same, right? Like there is an element of it's a different type of dictatorship where you're still trying to appeal to a to come kind of popular appeal, quote unquote, even if it doesn't exist. You're appealing to that political aesthetic, if you want. Affect is the word I was looking for. Sorry. Because you don't want to call yourself dictator for life. You don't want to do that. Sisi does the same, right? There are still elections. Even, one person runs, so it doesn't matter. But that's part of it. It's like, I want every few years the people that know that they don't have a choice to tell me that they don't have a choice, to reaffirm their choicelessness. And there is that joke, I think it's a Syrian joke, actually, of like there was an election, Hafiz, I think under Hafiz's time in the 80s or 90s, and Shabiha comes to the door of this mom or this woman who, let's say, whose son was supposed to vote but forgot to vote or something like that, and they come to her and says like, your son didn't vote, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna, she was freaked out. I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask him to vote and whatnot. And then the Shabiha, like the thug, basically pro-government thug, says, don't worry, we voted for him. Like that's the joke, if you want. Is ultimately we need some kind of number. The number, we can shift them, we can play around with them. There can be ridiculous numbers like in Russia, but we need some kind of numbers. And it's very important that they have that, because there's something about the fact that it's like it's like a ritual. No, it's literally a ritual. It's a ritual of every few years, 4, 5, 6 years more or less on average. We are reaffirming our power by letting you go vote, you knowing it doesn't matter, and you're going to have to do it anyway. And you're going to have to vote for me, like in any case, yeah. And that's part of it. That's really part.
It's also a good like moment or a good excuse to do extra propaganda. To like, you remember I'm still around, and you remember why you love me.
Yeah.
I have a very, very powerful example. And I'm going to say this, but then I think afterwards, I think we should like slowly shift or pause, because I feel like we go into this momentum and there may be some things that you came into this wanting to be talking about that we may have avoided.
Yeah.
Last night, as part of the Palestine Watch Party, we watched an incredible film called Suha, Surviving Hell.
Yeah.
About Lebanese resistance icon, Suha Bshara, her attempted assassination of Lahad.
Yeah.
Anton Lahad.
Yeah.
Her time in the Khiyam prison, just very quickly, this is a notorious prison run by a Zionist Lebanese militia at the time that the Israelis controlled and occupied southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
And
it's
so she
Lebanon,
attempted
by the border, for those who don't know.
By the border. And she spent 10 years in there, and the documentary is incredible. I'm going to rescreen it. It's filmed as the liberation of the South is happening. It's released 2001. Soho was released 1998, regardless. A lot of the film takes place in Khiyam prison, because after the war, after the occupation, after liberation, the prison was opened up as a museum. Come look what the Zionists did. Come look what the collaborators did. These are Lebanese. And there was a really specific story that she was telling while standing in the interrogation room with the documentarian. And her and another prisoner, who was 14 when she did her operation and was captured, talking about the torture that they'd experienced. and one very specific story, which is that they would use electrocution as a form of torture. And there were different types on the fingers, on the breasts, and on the genitals. And when the men, torturers, would come and implement and do their torture, they would give the wires, and especially to veiled women, they would give them the wires and say, put this on your breasts. And they would almost turn around. And the way Soha is recounting the story with the kind of sarcasm of like, yeah, they wanted to protect our sharaf, our honor.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm going to torture you, but I'm going to allow you, I'm not going to remove your bra. Like, a'udhu billah, astaghfirullah al-azim. But it's this really, we analyzed this afterwards when we were talking about this, like a person who is going to torture this other human in front of them and then doing this sort of, but I'm not an evil person. There's some sort of affirmation where it's like, I'm doing what I have to, but I am not overstepping it. I'm not a barbarian. I'm still going to let you. It's so bizarre. And in this, it's such an acute moment of, it requires such dehumanization to do this to a person and such conviction and villainy. But then even in that moment, and again, it returns for me, one of the like key lessons that I learned studying screenwriting and storytelling is that like well-written villains, like nobody thinks they are evil. Like good villains, you get these really shitty ones and whatever. Hey, I want to destroy the world. Yeah. No.
Which is usually for
like
kids.
Evil...
When unidimensional, I mean, it's usually like that. But then when it's supposed to be more nuanced and for adults and whatnot, then you have to at least empathize in one way or another with that evil character. Otherwise, like, what's the point?
Well, at least that person has a logic to why they're doing it. They're going to do this horrible thing, but to them, there's a reason. There's like a logic at least. And so I thought a lot about that when you were speaking in terms of this sort of, I mean, Israeli soldiers doing a genocide. That really pushes it, and it's really difficult to. And I don't think it's on us at all to humanize them, because some of the things we see them filming themselves do, dressing up in the clothes of the women that they've whatever. This is like fetishistic, morbid, disgusting behavior, and it's so difficult to place that within a framework of humanity. It's almost impossible. Again, I don't think that's on us.
No, it's not on us.
For sure, yeah.
Fanon's big thing is that oppression doesn't just dehumanize the victims. You have to dehumanize yourself in one way or another in order to do this. We mentioned that the IDF says it's going to investigate. There is a reason why they have to repeat this. And for me, it's pretty similar in terms of logic to why Bashar al-Assad has to have elections every few years, to why Sisi has to do it, why, Putin has to do it, and so on. The Iranian regime, obviously, and so on. It's because it's a way of them saying, we're going to continue doing this thing. And also, I think there is a logic to it. Like, if you're the Caesar file, the reason we know about the Caesar file in the Caesar file, for those who don't know, in Syria, is like thousands of corpses of tortured prisoners and murdered prisoners, tortured to death prisoners in Syria, is that the Assad regime itself was documenting all of this. Not just documenting all of this, but documenting with numbers. They would tattoo the numbers on, or at least write the numbers on the corpses and whatnot, with like date of birth and whatnot, as if they are just filing a person that died, and they're going to, they have to register it because the state has to register the death. And this is part of necropolitics. This is part of like the state has to have the final word in who gets to live. And that's, and by virtue of like deciding what kind of document you have to present to register your child to legally exist and so on. And of course, who gets to die and how that person dies. And more importantly, how that person is officially recorded, because of course, they're not officially recorded as dying under torture. They're officially recorded as dying of old age or illness or accident or what have you. Heart attack and so on. And that is how that power is reproduced. They're not following a like logic of like, well, don't they know that they're lying? Well, it doesn't matter. They may know that, but ultimately they're just doing their job. The whole Eichmann and Jerusalem thing, the banality of evil, is that he was just quote unquote a functionary. It doesn't mean he was a good person. People misunderstand this. It means that even if he was, it is irrelevant. The point is that he continued doing that job. And that job is part of that he was a cog in a death machine. And within the IDF, you have levels of this. You have the people who are on the ground, those who are filming themselves, like bombing, like destroying an apartment behind them with some music on TikTok or whatnot. And those that you mentioned going into apartments, looting, all of that stuff, destroying a Quran, burning a library of Al-Aqsa University, all of that shit. You have those people, and then you have most people who are kind of just behind the scenes, quote unquote. They're pressing a button. They're finding a way, some kind of complaint maybe that gets lost somewhere. They are part of that bureaucracy. And without that bureaucracy, you cannot have genocide. That's kind of one of Hannah Arendt's big contributions. It's not an incidental part of a genocide. The bureaucracy in Germany is not an incidental part of the Holocaust. Without it, you cannot have the Holocaust. They come together. And for me, that's, again, using the comparison here because it's one of the most studied events in history, which brings me, we said we're going to pause a sec, but this is what, right now, Gaza, what's happening for the past 7+ months is objectively the single most documented genocide in history already. Just by virtue of the fact that it's been virtually live streamed throughout, more or less, with some interruptions here and there, of course, due to the Israelis either trying to block off the internet or bombing, murdering a journalist or what have you. And more importantly, preventing foreign journalists also from entering and so on. So by definition, by default, I mean, the ICJ, let's say, if they want to be the boring kind of lawyers just wanting to go through the entirety of the evidence and whatnot, they have decades worth of content, right? Of files, of images, of videos, of archiving this and that. There's an entire politics of that, of course, what counts as a valid, all of that. And that in and of itself is the strength of the Israelis that they have, right? This is an advantage that they have, I mean. Is the fact that ultimately what South Africa asked is that this needs to be stopped now, because if it's not stopped now, we know where it's going to lead. And the legal arguments that they presented, which the only time I watched lawyers talk, was pretty straightforward, because it was pretty, on point in that sense. It was very logical. And this is where the gaslighting comes in. You know it's logical. You know where it's going to lead. Because of A, B, C, D, and E. The South Africans, they had like an entire file. They were using the Israelis themselves, their own videos of themselves talking. That this is what's going to happen. I'll end on this. I attended a like UN-related panel here in Geneva like a few months ago. And one of the people on the panel was Michael Fekhi, who's a special rapporteur, UN special rapporteur to the right of food, who was presenting at the time, it's since been released, the first ever kind of UN document on starvation as a weapon of war, which is in the case now, been released and has been obviously proven. And he said that like one of the reasons why I had no difficulties calling this a genocide is that I'm not a genocide lawyer. And because I had, if you want to spend all of your time going through the question of intent, and then he's Lebanese, so he said it this way, like, yeah, Habibi, they told us. That's how he framed it. Like, they literally told us on day 2, the defense minister, whatever the fuck his name is, said that we are going to cut off food, energy, water, etc. We are dealing with human animals and we are going to act like it, or something along those lines. People can find the exact quote. Is it rocket science to then think, okay, then, I wonder what's going to happen next? But he said it. He said it.
Yeah.
And this is where the gaslighting comes in. It's been 7+ months of us telling ourselves and telling each other, me and you, and on the groups that we're in and online and whatnot, this is happening. We know it's happening because they're telling us it's happening. And yet we open various media outlets, The Atlantic, New York Times, BBC, and so on, some much worse than others. And they are debating things. There's the line in The Atlantic by Graham Wood, like there are ways you can legally kill a child. Just take that sentence as it is. Or there's been a violent incident, and all of those ways you can talk about something to avoid talking about the thing. And this is where the violence of language comes in. This is where the politics of language comes in. And without it, I don't think such a project as genocide, because it is a project with an end goal, can't be possible. Because every single time, every single day, you waking up as the genocidaire, you have to then justify it to yourself, justify it to the world, do it all over again until you can't. It has to be bureaucratized. It has to be systematized. It has to be almost like you've almost outsourced genocide, which they have literally done parts of that with the AI, which we found out from the 972 investigation called Lavender, whatever. This is where we're at. There's like almost like a perfect storm in many ways. Technology, impunity, far-right racism, supremacy, historical trauma, sure, it's there. That's a contribution to the zero-sum game, and so on and so forth. And the conclusion that you get from all of this is that, well, obviously no one's going to stop them from within. We've spoken to some of the Israelis who have tried to do this. They can't. They just can't. There aren't enough of them. And Hamas obviously isn't. They don't have the power, and they have different politics anyway. Who? And this is why for me it comes down to like, well, obviously it has to be sanctions. Obviously there has to be like diplomatic isolation. Obviously there has to be all of these things, because quite literally nothing else can stop it. Short of like Iran deciding to invade for some weird reason, and even then I'm not even sure that would actually stop it, and probably make things much worse, of course. For the record, fuck Iran. But like, what else would stop it? The Egyptians haven't stopped it, and it's by their border. Who is gonna stop it? And this is where I start losing my mind, as I think my tone of language is showing here. But this is why I feel broken. Like, then where is this going? And of course we know that I prevent myself logically almost, or emotionally if you want, from reaching that end point, because I feel like I've given up if I do that. If I tell myself, well, in 1 month they're gonna kill everyone, I was like, well, it's almost like I've given myself the excuse to stop paying attention for a month, and I don't want that.
No, it's because we're constantly trying to formulate a possible better outcome.
Yeah.
In our analysis, in our language. Like, it has been very interesting for me as a Lebanese who's been, for a decade, and especially surrounded by Syrians, bludgeoned, some more literally than others, by the quote unquote resistance. But in the last few months, with this genocide, that it is a resistance. Like Hamas, the way it's shifted, even for me, it's a necessity, because it's like when we have these conversations of what can stop this, there is like armed resistance. There is sort of forces, not just Hamas, others who are like preventing more, but also it's a ragtag group.
Yeah.
Hamas is the biggest one. There's 18 armed groups in Gaza, and all of them are just using kind of like makeshift things to attack tanks and the most well-funded nuclear power.
Yeah.
But then, okay, so let's imagine it like escalating and whatever, and then there is like a more global support for the resistance or whatever. Like it still hits that point of like terrifying, because I think the only way that we understand, if we do accept fascism as a framework of what has taken hold of the Israeli state, the Israeli society, the Israeli government, military, the only way that we understand of how fascism is defeated, and if we use the Second World War as an example, is through military intervention, because they will accept no other language.
Yeah.
And again, this is an analysis that I've hated for 20 years, because it is just an endless cycle of violence. But this is something that I feel like it's just become painfully, like brutally evident that they are refusing any other language. And again, I hate this. This is so opposed to any of my politics, but my politics mean nothing when it's like we're faced with a genocidal fascist army that has gone rampant. And yeah, as someone from the region, like I have thought about this for a very long time. Like, when will, again, with the idea that power never commits suicide, and especially fascism, like once you get to the sort of like point of fascism, there's no point in calling them fascists. Again, we were sort of talking earlier when it's like you call them out, like you're a genocider or you're a racist. That kind of implies that if you say someone is doing a racism, is doing a genocide, then like the saying of the thing becomes a pausing moment.
Yeah.
Of whoa, oh, it's racist. It's bad to be racist. But here we have like this thing that's like openly saying what they're doing and getting all the support to do it. And so the thing of like calling it out becomes almost like fruitless.
Yeah.
Like, you were doing a genocide. Yes, we are. Like, you sort of double take, because, and yeah, I've seen this 1,000 times. Yes, we are doing this. They deserve it.
Yeah, and if you're the journalist, let's say, who's not prepared for this, and they say, well, no, we're not doing it, but also they deserve it or whatever, and you're not equipped to understand that kind of language and what it means, then you're bound to kind of just take a step back, because I don't want to justify these journalists. I mean, I'm so pissed off at journalism in general. But okay, I'll put it differently so I don't ramble on too much. And we will like slowly wrap up because it's impossible to have this topic and not talk for 10 hours about it. But we just have to find a way to wrap up. I'm speaking to myself here. When I said like I fear the worst at times, I refuse to accept that anything is inevitable. I refuse it. For one, like we just don't know. The far-right Ben Gvir almost died of a car accident. And for fuck's sake, he did not. And Raisi, the president of Iran, did actually die of a helicopter accident, which was objectively funny.
That was great.
And so like things happen that it's impossible to predict. And that's why for me, I refuse to just accept the inevitability. The thing that Netanyahu and the others want is absolutely going to happen. It's almost inevitable because might is right and because they have such overwhelming firepower. I refuse. Yeah. The Americans used the mother of all bombs about a year before they had to fuck off. They were forced to fuck off because they just lost. And fuck the Taliban, for the record. But clearly they lost that war. The Americans lost that war, even though they used the biggest bomb that's not nuclear in existence to show that they can. For me, the logic of those bombs, the logic of yesterday's massacre, is a way of them to say we are inevitable. To paraphrase fucking Thanos here, I am inevitable. We are inevitable. Pretty fucking good metaphor, actually, because he, with one click, right, like he can end half of life on the universe. They act like this right now, that we can because we can, and we are doing it because we can, whether you want to or not. And of course, the question from like you and I are asking here, and I don't have the answer, but I want to see something that can stop this for all of our sake. And I really mean for all of our sake, because if something like this is allowed to create a logic on its own, which has been the case, of course, for the past 7+ months now, something else also happens. There are consequences to this beyond Israel-Palestine. Priorities right now is Gaza, of course, and the West Bank, of course. But these things have a tendency of going beyond, or spill over, so to speak, beyond their immediate. I can give you a quick example. The AI technology that they're using is going to be fucking, like, it's not going to stop in Gaza. It's going to be applied elsewhere. And at some point, something, like, there is a point, like a point of no return, right? It's usually kind of theorized, like, when is that point? The thing that people need to understand, like listeners, in my opinion, need to understand this, is that when we speak of a point of no return, what we mean is that we need to identify it in order to avoid it. And also, more importantly, we can, even if we identify it and we know that, oh, we're getting close to that point, or we have just crossed that point, we can be wrong that it's a point of no return and we should still try and stop it. There is no law of nature here. This is not fucking gravity. Gravity is what killed Raisi in the helicopter. Gravity is not international law. It's not human right. No, these are social constructs. We have agency here to do something about it. I'll stop on this. I can go in different directions here.
I mean, there's a really clear parallel with that, with like ecological and climate collapse, where it's like, what's the worst that can happen if we do a massive green transition and like turns out climate change is like flawed and like, you know, oh shit, we just, you know, spent all this money making really good technology that's like good for everybody. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. What if we spend all of this time and improve the world for nothing?
Yeah. But no, I've got a lot to respond. The spillover is already happening. I think what we're seeing in Sudan and lately in El Fasher and Darfur is like, and the same sort of tactics, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, the complete razing. It is a genocide by the Janjaweed.
Yeah.
The Sudanese army is not much better, but regardless, it's a genocide, and that violence and the fact that it's so overshadowed by Gaza, that sounds very strange, but the point is that the very fact that there is this massive thing happening in Gaza, that there's so much attention to it, allows and like enables other genocides that are just taking place concurrently.
Yeah, exactly.
Secondly, last night's film was really important for me, actually, because it's filmed in 2000 and you see scenes of liberation. And it really moved me. And 2 days ago was Liberation Day.
Yeah.
Right? In Lebanon, marking the 2000 withdrawal of the Israeli troops, occupation troops. And the scenes of people re-meeting, holding hands, hugging each other, seeing each other for the first time, especially Palestinians who, you know, had this huge buffer zone. And so were able to go to the fence and see their family. And was beautiful and moving, and kind of really forced me to kind of think of the tangibility of liberation, of freedom, of the possibility that, like, again, like none of this is inevitable, and it going forward is not inevitable. I've also been thinking a lot about that. It really struck me a lot because, again, watching those scenes in the 2000s and the liberated Khiyam prison plastered with flags of Hezbollah, of Harakat Amal, as well as the Communist Party. But it was very difficult to see those images and be like, yes, yes, Amal, yes, Hezbollah, you did it. In that moment, they did. And it's just the problem that, like, for the last 10 years, 15 years, we've been hit over the head with this thing of we are the liberator, we are the resistance. And they've taken over the fucking country. But anyway, so all that to say, far removed, nothing's inevitable. And there is, I'll finish on this because this is very personal, but I think really connects a lot of it, which is I remember 2020 in Lebanon being there, not the explosion. Everyone talks about the explosion. It hit the news. It was massive. It changed the country. It fucked everyone up. But 4 months afterwards, December 25, 2020, I remember being in my apartment, being in my room, and feeling the ground shake, hearing this like massive noise, looking outside and seeing like 5 dots in the distance. And there were Israeli jets and missiles that ultimately were going to Latakia, to North Syria. They shot over our airspace.
Yeah.
But that moment fucked me up so fundamentally because when I saw those dots and heard the noise, like, no, it's not just like a flashlight. I thought it was coming right for me. Yeah. And I thought they were nukes. We know the Israelis have nukes.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I thought it's over. They're nuking Lebanon. And I've been reflecting on that for the last 4 years because, well, it's indicative of just how traumatized I am, that like anything is possible. And now I think a lot of us are experiencing that with like seeing what the Israelis are doing. And then there's like, am I crazy for thinking that? Because now seeing everything they've done, I am constantly thinking, what if they just drop a nuke? Like there's this kind of common sense, no, they wouldn't do that. No, that would be too far. But like everything they've done so far. Exactly.
Why? Why is that
exactly?
Too far? Like, why? By what logic? Like, again, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
No, exactly. Yeah. But so like most people I'll say this to, especially here in Europe, who still have a kind of grounded sense in like some liberal imaginary of world order, where it's like, no, they wouldn't do that. It's like, what? Because they'd get, and even if it's like a cynical thing of they would get pushback, would they? Could they not just deny it or be like, oh, this is, I don't know.
Not only can they do that, or like, oh, instead of using the nuclear bomb, they use the Moab. Not only can they do this, but there will be people in positions of power in the West and in the media, as there are now. If you have someone who is able to write, there are legal ways to kill a child and keep his job, not only keep his job, but keep his followers and whatnot. What's the argument for Hiroshima and Nagasaki? The argument is that if we didn't do this, it would have dragged on for months and years afterwards. And therefore, instead of 100-something thousand people died, there could have been 1 million. So by dropping the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, we did a good thing. And here I'm using Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and people might think, oh, but like that's too far away. Fucking Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, said the exact same thing about a week ago. It's not rocket science in that sense. Like, if you understand that the logic is to end this as from their quote unquote perspective, then it's a zero-sum game, as we said, and there's only, if you're doing this and then you have to do more of this and then you do more of this, there is a very convenient weapon that already exists. They may decide at some point, or someone might decide, they're crazy enough to do so, that like, we will deal with the political consequences. We're already dealing with the political consequences. How worse can they get? MBS butchered and hacked to death Khashoggi in an embassy. There was blowback for like a year, and now fucking Messi is chilling in Saudi Arabia. At some point, these folks who are in power have understood that they believe, in any case, they genuinely believe this, that they are untouchable. We have to start from that logic, understand them from that logic, in order to try and understand what might come next. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but let's not stop like intellectually the whole, like, it's almost like it's a discursive impossibility in our head. Like, no, it can't happen because like whatever. Well, it can, and there's no reason why, actually, objectively, there's no reason why it can't. They can actually see this as like the lesser evil or whatever. I don't want to end the note on like fucking nuclear weapons or whatnot, but like it is one of my frustrations that I had, because generally for me, when I say hope is a discipline, when I say like being optimistic is a discipline, like the whole like Baldwin's quote, like I'm forced to be an optimist. It's because I generally understand that things are not inevitable. Things can always get worse. But then the flip side of that is that, well, they can actually get better. And they can get better. There's no law of nature saying that they can't. Netanyahu wants us to believe that they can't, but that's just not a fact. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now. Listeners, thank you for listening to this. So much more we could have said, and I'm sure we will find different ways to say it in like other episodes and whatnot. But life calls and there are responsibilities and shit like that, and so we'll leave you for now. Thank you for listening. Ayman, thanks for joining me for this hopefully coherent rant.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do more of those. And I'm still hoping for the best, because I refuse to, even when I don't feel it, I'm trying to feel it even when I don't, because I don't think it's good to avoid, to abandon that. I mean, to give up on that. So on that note, yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. This has been another episode of The Fire These Times. If you like this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star rating or review on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. And if you really like this podcast, head on to patreon.com/firethesetimes. That's patreon.com/firethesetimes. The Fire These Times is a media ecosystem based in the periphery that supports a bunch of media projects, including this one. For $5 a month, and even less if you opt for the yearly subscription, you can help this ecosystem grow and get early access to all episodes of The Fire These Times, Politically Depressed, Obscuristan, and Ghida, as well as an invitation to join our monthly hangout, watch parties, upcoming book club, as well as exclusive episodes. Thank you for listening, and take care, everyone.